The wind had a way of speaking in the high mountains, not in words but in pressure and cold, in the long, low moan that slipped through the trees and pressed against a man's bones until he remembered he was alive. The lone mountain man stood near the edge of a small clearing, his boots sunk deep into crusted snow, swinging his axe with the same slow rhythm he had kept for years. Chop, breathe, lift, chop. The sound echoed once, then vanished into the pines. This place swallowed noise the way it swallowed people. His beard was thick and streaked with gray, his hands scarred and split from winters that never truly ended up here. He had chosen this life deliberately after discovering that the world beyond the ridges demanded things from him he could no longer give. Up here, the mountains asked only endurance. He gave them that, and in return, they left him alone. The cabin behind him leaned slightly to the east, as if tired of standing straight. Smoke drifted lazily from the chimney, carrying the faint smell of pine resin and boiled roots. He had just split the last log for the morning when something shifted at the edge of his awareness, a feeling rather than a sound. The forest had gone still, the birds pausing mid-argument. His shoulders tensed. Stillness in the mountains meant either danger or surprise. He turned slowly, axe still in his hands. At first, he thought the figure near the tree line was a trick of shadow, the way hunger and loneliness sometimes shaped illusions out of nothing. But then the figure moved, taking one careful step forward, boots crunching softly against snow. It was a woman, thin, wrapped in layers that didn't match, sleeves too long, coat too short, fabric faded by time and weather. Her hair spilled from beneath a torn knit cap in tangled strands, dark and matted, lifted by the wind. Her face was pale, lips cracked, cheeks hollowed by weeks or months without enough food. She stopped several paces away, close enough that he could see her shaking, not just from cold but from fear. People didn't come here unless they were desperate. He knew that, and he knew what desperation could drive people to do. "I'm not worth much, sir, but I can cook." Her voice cut through the cold like a fragile thread. It wasn't loud, it wasn't pleading. It sounded practiced, as though she had said the words before many times to many men who had turned away or shut doors in her face. The sentence carried shame, but also something stubborn underneath it, a refusal to disappear entirely. The mountain man tightened his grip on the axe. He didn't raise it. He didn't lower it either. He studied her the way he studied the weather, searching for signs, deceit, danger, sickness. All he saw was exhaustion, the kind that lived deeper than muscles that settled into the eyes. "What brings you up here?" he asked. His voice was rough from disuse, scraping against the air like stone. She swallowed. "I followed the road until it ended. Then I followed the trees. I didn't know where else to go." The honesty of it unsettled him more than any lie would have. People usually came with stories, excuses, demands. This woman had come with nothing but a statement of fact and a single offering. "You alone?" he asked. She nodded quickly. "Yes, just me." The wind pushed harder, and she wrapped her arms around herself, shoulders curling inward as if she were trying to make herself smaller. He noticed then how her gaze kept drifting to the cabin, to the thin line of smoke, to the promise of warmth she could almost feel but not touch. He had not planned to share his shelter with anyone ever again. The cabin was more than wood and nails. It was a boundary he had built between himself and the rest of the world. Letting someone cross that line meant risking questions, memories, attachments he had buried deep beneath snow and routine. Still, he remembered hunger, he remembered cold, he remembered standing once at the edge of someone else's life, hoping for mercy and finding none. "There's soup," he said at last. "It's thin, and there's not much." Her eyes widened slightly, as if she hadn't expected even that. "I don't need much," she said quickly. "I'll work. I won't be trouble." He gave a short, humorless huff. Trouble finds its own way. He stepped aside, just enough to open a path toward the cabin. It wasn't an invitation spoken aloud, but it was clear enough. She hesitated, glancing at him, then at the axe, then at the open door. Trust did not come easily to people like her, or to people like him. She moved slowly, carefully, as though any sudden motion might shatter the fragile permission she had been given. As she passed him, he caught the faint smell of old smoke and damp fabric, the scent of someone who had slept wherever sleep was allowed. He noticed the way she kept her hands visible, palms open, empty. Inside, the cabin was dim, lit by the dull glow of the fire and the gray daylight filtering through a single small window. The walls were lined with shelves holding jars of dried herbs, tools, and bits of metal that might one day be useful. A rough table sat near the stove, one chair pushed beneath it, the other turned slightly away, as if expecting someone who had never arrived. She stood just inside the door, unsure where to put herself, eyes flicking over every detail. People unused to shelter often didn't know how to occupy space without apologizing for it. "You can sit," he said, nodding toward the chair, "or stand, your choice." She chose to sit, perching on the edge like a bird ready to flee. He poured 2 bowls of soup, the broth clear enough to see the few beans and slivers of root floating within it. When he handed her a bowl, her fingers brushed his, cold as river stones. "Thank you," she murmured, holding the bowl close, breathing in the steam before taking a sip. Her eyes closed briefly, and the sound she made was almost a sob, quickly swallowed. He turned away, suddenly uncomfortable with witnessing that kind of gratitude. He ate standing up, leaning against the counter, watching the fire instead of her. Silence stretched between them, not awkward, just cautious. After a few minutes, she spoke again. "I meant what I said about cooking." He glanced at her. "I heard you. I'm good at it." She continued, a little more strength in her voice now that warmth had begun to reach her bones. "With almost nothing, I can make meals stretch. I can make them taste like something." That last word carried weight, like something better, like home. He thought of his own meals, functional, bland, eaten only to keep moving. He had not cared about taste in a long time. Taste was for people who lingered. "What's your name?" he asked before he could stop himself. She froze, spoon halfway to her mouth, as if the question had startled her more than the cold had. "Lena," she said finally, "most people don't ask." "Well," he replied gruffly, "most people don't come this far up a mountain." She smiled faintly, the expression unfamiliar on her face, like a language she was relearning. The fire crackled, and outside the wind resumed its endless conversation with the trees. For the first time in years, the cabin held more than one heartbeat. He didn't know it yet, but this moment, the simple act of letting a stranger cross his threshold, was the first crack in the walls he had built around himself. And as Lena sipped her soup, warming her hands and her hope at the same time, the mountain watched in its patient, ancient way, as 2 lost lives edged unknowingly toward a shared path. Spring did not arrive all at once. It crept in the way a careful guest might, testing the floorboards before stepping fully inside. The snow retreated in patches, reluctant and dirty at the edges, revealing earth dark and wet beneath. Streams swelled with meltwater, their voices louder now, no longer trapped under ice. The air softened, carrying the smell of thawed soil and pine sap. The mountain man felt the change in his joints before he saw it with his eyes, an easing of the ache that winter carved into bone. Lena noticed it in the light. "It's different," she said one morning, standing in the doorway with a mug cupped between her hands, like the world's holding its breath before speaking. He looked where she looked, at the slope across the clearing, where green pushed stubbornly through brown. "Mountains speak slow," he said, "but they always speak." They worked more outside now. There was ground to clear, repairs to finish before the rains came hard. He taught her how to read the sky not for beauty, but for warning. She taught him how to plant a small kitchen garden in the thin soil, how to coax life from places that seemed to offer nothing. He had never bothered before. Food came from traps and stores, from routines that required no hope. Seeds required belief in tomorrow. One afternoon, as they knelt side by side pressing seeds into the ground, she said quietly, I never thought I'd do this again. Planting, he asked. Planning, she said. It feels dangerous, he nodded. It is. They shared a look, understanding passing between them without the need for more words. Planning meant imagining a future. Imagining a future meant risking disappointment. But as he watched her brush soil from her palms, he realized he had already taken that risk. The first real rain of spring came suddenly. Clouds rolled in thick and low, turning the world gray and close. They were caught halfway back from the stream when the sky opened, rain drenching them in seconds. They ran, laughing without meaning to, boots slipping in mud, hair plastered to faces. Inside the cabin, soaked and breathless, they stood too close, water dripping from their clothes onto the floor. She laughed then, a full sound that filled the small space and bounced off the walls. He found himself smiling before he realized he was doing it. It felt strange, like stretching a muscle long unused. You look different, she said, catching her breath. So do you, he replied. They changed into dry clothes, moving around each other with a new ease. The cabin no longer felt like a boundary but a shared place, shaped by both their hands. She cooked while the rain drummed on the roof, a steady rhythm that made the fire seem brighter. The smell of fresh herbs rose with the steam, and he felt a warmth settle in his chest that had nothing to do with heat. Later, as the rain softened to a whisper, she grew quiet. He noticed it immediately. What's wrong? He asked. She hesitated, eyes fixed on the fire. Nothing's wrong, she said. Then, after a moment, something's changing. He waited. He had learned not to rush her. I've been thinking, she continued, about staying, about what it means. And, he said gently, and I don't want to be a guest forever, she said. I don't want to feel like I'm borrowing a life. The words landed heavily, not as a demand, but as a truth she needed him to hear. He stared into the flames, heart thudding. He had offered her shelter. He had not yet offered her permanence, not because he didn't want to, but because naming it felt like stepping off a cliff. You're not borrowing, he said finally. You've earned every board you've touched. She shook her head. That's not what I mean. I want to choose this, and I want to know if you're choosing it too. He looked at her then, really looked. At the woman who had arrived shaking at the edge of his clearing, offering cooking as proof of worth. At the woman who now stood steady, eyes clear, asking not for safety but for honesty. I'm choosing, he said. The certainty in his voice surprised him. I already did. I just didn't know how to say it. Her shoulders loosened as if she had been carrying a weight she hadn't admitted to. She smiled, not wide but real. They sat together in silence after that, not because there was nothing to say, but because there was nothing left to fear in saying it. As weeks passed, signs of their shared life multiplied in small ways. 2 mugs always drying by the sink, 2 sets of boots by the door, laughter sometimes sudden, sometimes soft, woven into the days. He caught himself thinking in plural without effort. We need more wood. We should check the traps earlier. We'll plant there next year. One morning they found the garden sprouting. Tiny green shoots pierced the soil, fragile and defiant. Lena knelt, touching them with reverence. They made it, she whispered. He felt a swell of pride he hadn't expected. You did good. So did you, she replied. You stayed. Trouble did not vanish simply because hope had taken root. Late one afternoon, smoke rose in the distance where there should have been none. He saw it first, a thin line against the sky. His body went taut. Inside, he said. They watched from the window as 2 figures appeared on the far trail, moving slowly, burdened with packs, strangers. The mountain man's hand went to the rifle by the door. Lena stood beside him, not hiding, but not reckless. They're tired, she said. Not dangerous, at least not yet. He considered. Once he would have vanished into the trees, left no sign of life. Now the cabin held more than himself. Decisions carried different weight. When the strangers reached the clearing, he stepped outside, keeping distance. He spoke little, listened more. They were passing through, they said. Looking for work. He gave them directions, a warning about the weather. and sent them on their way with a small bundle of food Lena had prepared without being asked. After they left, she watched him carefully. "You didn't have to. I wanted to," he said. "Doesn't mean I'll do it every time." She nodded. "That's fair." That night, as they lay in their separate spaces, the sound of the forest settling around them, he realized something else had changed. He slept deeper, not heavier, but safer. Trust had altered the shape of his rest. Summer came quickly after that, green and generous. The mountain bloomed. Their garden thrived. They worked hard and rested well. Sometimes they spoke of the world beyond the ridges, not with longing, but with curiosity. Sometimes they didn't speak at all. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in bruised purples and golds, Lena stood beside him on the ridge overlooking the valley. "I used to think worth was something you had to prove," she said, "that if I could make myself useful enough, I'd be allowed to exist." He nodded. "I thought if I made myself invisible enough, I'd stop hurting people." She turned to him. "We were both wrong." He met her gaze, feeling the truth of it settle in his chest. "Worth isn't earned," he said slowly. "It's shared." She smiled, eyes bright. The wind moved through the trees, gentle now, no longer cutting. The mountains seemed to breathe with them. That night, she baked bread with the last of the flour, shaping it carefully, deliberately. When it came out of the oven, golden and steaming, she placed it between them at the table. "For us," she said. He broke the loaf, the crust crackling softly, and handed her half. They ate in companionable silence, the kind that speaks louder than words. As darkness fell, he stepped outside alone for a moment, looking up at the stars. They were sharp and endless, the same as they had always been, but he was not the same man who had once chosen them over people. He had learned that isolation could keep you alive, but connection could make you whole. Behind him, the cabin glowed warmly, light spilling from the window, carrying the sound of movement, of life. He turned back toward it, toward the woman who had walked into his solitude and offered not just food, but presence. Spring had come to the mountain, and this time it stayed. Morning came slowly in the mountains, not with a sudden burst of light, but with a gradual easing of darkness, as if night were reluctant to let go. Pale gray crept through the small window of the cabin, touching the rough wooden floor and climbing the walls inch by inch. The mountain man woke before the light fully arrived, as he always did, his body trained by years of habit rather than comfort. For a brief disorienting moment, he sensed something different in the air, an unfamiliar warmth of presence, and his hand moved instinctively toward the knife he kept near the bed. Then he remembered. He sat up quietly and listened. The wind murmured outside, softer than the night before. The fire in the stove had burned down to embers, and somewhere near the table there was the faint sound of movement, careful and deliberate, like someone afraid of making noise in a place that wasn't yet theirs. Lena stood near the counter, her back to him, sleeves rolled past her wrists. She had found a small stash of supplies and laid them out with surprising order. Dried beans soaking in a chipped bowl, rice measured carefully, a few wrinkled carrots he had nearly forgotten about, herbs tied together with twine. She moved with the confidence of habit, not rushing, not hesitating, her hands knowing what to do even if the rest of her was still unsure. He watched her for a long moment without speaking. There was something unsettling about seeing another person in his space after so many years alone. Not unpleasant, just strange, like hearing an echo where there had only ever been silence. "You're up early," he said at last. She startled, shoulders tensing, then turned quickly. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. I just thought I could make something before you woke." He grunted, swinging his legs off the bed. "Didn't say you couldn't." Relief flickered across her face, subtle but unmistakable. She turned back to the stove, stirring slowly. Soon, the cabin filled with a richer smell than he was used to in the mornings. It wasn't fancy, but it was warm and inviting, layered in a way his own cooking never was. They ate together at the table this time, not facing away from each other, not standing. The food was simple, yet it had depth. Beans softened just right, rice seasoned with herbs he'd gathered but never bothered to use properly. He took a bite, then another, surprised by how full it tasted, how it seemed to settle something inside him beyond hunger. "You really can cook," he said. She smiled, small and cautious. "It's what kept me alive." That opened a door neither of them had planned to walk through, but once opened, it refused to close easily. As they ate, she spoke more, not all at once, not in a flood, but in pieces. She told him about kitchens she'd worked in briefly, always underpaid, always replaceable. About nights spent memorizing recipes instead of sleeping, because thinking about food kept the fear away. About how people treated her differently once they knew she could make something for them. "They see you," she said quietly, eyes fixed on her bowl, at least while they're eating. He understood that too well. He had once been seen for what he could do, not for who he was. When that usefulness disappeared, so had everyone else. After breakfast, he went out to split more wood. She followed him to the door, hesitating. "Is there anything else you need?" she asked. He considered. He wasn't used to being asked that. "You don't have to. I want to." She interrupted gently. "Just tell me." He handed her a worn broom. Cabin could use a sweep. She took it like it was a gift. As the day unfolded, they worked side by side but apart. He repaired a section of the roof loosened by winter storms, while she cleaned, organized, washed clothes in cold water until her hands reddened. She hummed softly as she worked, an absent-minded tune that rose and fell with no clear melody. It filled the cabin without demanding attention, making the space feel less empty. At midday, she brought him food outside flat, bread she'd made using an old trick she'd learned on the road, cooked right on the stove's iron surface. He ate sitting on a log, watching her hover uncertainly, not sure whether to join him. "You can sit," he said. She did, leaving a careful distance between them. The mountains stretched endlessly around them, silent and vast. She looked at them with something like awe. "It's beautiful," she said. "It's unforgiving," he replied. She nodded. "So is everywhere else." That afternoon, clouds rolled in low, heavy with the promise of snow. The air thickened, pressing close. Inside the cabin, the light dimmed and the fire crackled louder. Lena sorted through the herbs again, asking questions this time. What grew where? What worked for pain? What was good for flavor? He found himself answering more than he intended to, pointing out bundles, telling her when to use them, when not to. "You learned all this yourself?" she asked. "Had to," he said. "No one else was around." She smiled at that, not pitying, just understanding. "I had cookbooks once," she said. "Lost them, but the recipes stayed." As evening settled in, the snow began, soft at first, then heavier, coating the world in white. The cabin felt smaller with the storm pressing in, but also safer. She made dinner again, this time stretching what little they had into something hearty enough to leave leftovers. When she placed his bowl in front of him, their fingers brushed, warmer now than the night before. "You don't have to stay," he said suddenly, surprising himself. "Once the storm passes." She looked at him steadily. "I know." Silence followed, thick but not uncomfortable. The firelight danced across the walls, and outside, the storm sang its steady song. Later, as they prepared to sleep, he noticed she paused near the door to the small storage room he'd offered her. "Thank you," she said again, softer than before, "for letting me stay, for trusting me." He shrugged, but his voice carried something gentler than usual. "Don't make me regret it." She smiled, a little braver this time. As she closed the door behind her, he lay back on his bed, staring up at the ceiling. For the first time in years, the night didn't feel quite so long. Somewhere in the cabin, another person breathed, and that simple fact, more than anything else, changed the shape of his solitude. Days in the mountains did not pass the way they did in towns. There were no clocks marking hours, No bells or traffic or voices to carve time into neat pieces. Instead, time moved by light and shadow, by hunger and fatigue, by the slow rhythm of work and rest. After Lena arrived, that rhythm shifted, almost imperceptibly at first, like a trail altered by many small footsteps. The mountain man noticed it one morning when he realized he had slept later than usual. The light through the window was already strong, touching the far wall where it never reached so early. He sat up, confused, listening. There was no danger in the air, no tension. Just the sound of water moving, the soft scrape of wood against wood, and somewhere beneath it all, that quiet humming again. He rose and stepped outside. The air was crisp but no longer biting, the kind of cold that woke the lungs without hurting them. Snow still blanketed the ground, but here and there dark earth showed through, stubborn and patient. Lena knelt near the stream that ran past the cabin, sleeves rolled high, hands red from the cold water as she rinsed clothes against smooth stones. She worked steadily, efficiently, her breath puffing in small clouds. "You'll freeze your hands," he said. She looked up, startled, then smiled. "They'll warm again." He grunted, not fully convinced, but didn't press. He split wood while she worked, the sound of his axe steady, grounding. When she finished, she hung the clothes on a line she'd strung between two trees without asking, using old cord he'd forgotten he had. They flapped gently in the breeze, a small, domestic sight that made him pause longer than he meant to. Inside, the cabin no longer felt like a shelter built only for survival. It still smelled of pine and smoke, but now there were other scents layered in warm bread, dried herbs crushed between fingers, the faint sweetness of something simmering. Lena had reorganized the shelves, grouping items by use rather than habit. At first, he'd bristled at that, the way one does when someone touches things they consider fixed. But he found, to his irritation, that it made sense. He could find what he needed faster now. They spoke more as the days went on, though neither of them rushed it. Conversation came in fragments during work, during meals, during moments of shared quiet. He told her which trails were safe and which ones vanished without warning. She listened closely, asking questions, remembering everything. She told him about the shelters she'd passed through, places where the air was thick with despair and rules, where kindness existed but was rationed. She spoke without bitterness, just fact. One afternoon, while he repaired a trap near the tree line, she followed him, carrying a small basket. "I found something," she said, kneeling beside a patch of snowmelt. He leaned closer. "Those'll make you sick if you don't know how to prepare them." "I know," she said quickly. "I learned from someone on the road. I wouldn't touch them otherwise." He studied her face, searching for doubt. He found none, only care. "All right," he said, "but we'll check them together." That became a pattern, shared caution, shared knowledge. She never assumed she knew better, but she also didn't shrink from what she knew. And slowly, without either of them naming it, trust settled in. At night, when the fire burned low and the wind pressed against the walls, they sometimes sat across from each other, each occupied with small tasks. He sharpened tools, she mended clothes, stitching careful and neat. Silence stretched comfortably, no longer something to endure. It was filled with meaning, with awareness of the other person's presence. One night, as the fire cracked and popped, she spoke without looking up. "Why did you come here?" The question hovered between them. He didn't answer right away. Outside, an owl called, its voice echoing through the trees. "I didn't come," he said finally. "I ran." She nodded, accepting that. "From what?" He stared into the fire. The flames shifted, revealing old images he had buried. A town, a house with too many windows. A voice raised in anger, another in pain. He felt his chest tighten. "From myself," he said. She didn't press. She never did. Instead, she set her work aside and poured them each a cup of hot water steeped with herbs. She handed him one without ceremony, fingers brushing his. This time, neither of them flinched. As winter loosened its grip, the mountains began to change. Snow retreated slowly, revealing moss and stone. Streams swelled with meltwater, Animals grew bolder, moving closer to the cabin. With the change came new work. He showed her how to set traps, how to track without leaving too much of a trace. She showed him how to stretch meals further without making them dull, how to use spices and timing to coax flavor from scarcity. One evening, he returned from checking snares to find her sitting on the steps, shoulders slumped, staring at the ground. He stopped short, something tightening in his chest. "What happened?" he asked. She looked up, eyes rimmed red, not with tears but with exhaustion. "I heard voices," she said softly, "down near the old road. Men." His muscles tensed instantly. "Did they see you?" "I don't think so. I hid. I waited until they passed." He nodded, mind already mapping routes, risks. "You did right." She swallowed. "I don't want to bring trouble here." He stepped closer, crouching so they were eye level. "Trouble comes whether we invite it or not. This isn't on you." She studied his face, searching for certainty. Finding it, she let out a breath she'd been holding. That night, he set extra traps, checked the perimeter, slept lighter than usual. But nothing came. The mountain remained indifferent, vast and watchful. In the weeks that followed, Lena grew stronger. Color returned to her face. Her movements lost their hesitation. She laughed more, sometimes at small things, sometimes at nothing at all. The sound still startled him, but in a good way. It reminded him of something he'd forgotten how to feel. One afternoon, while they worked side by side repairing a fence, she said, "You don't talk about the past much." He shrugged. "There's not much worth keeping." She considered that. Sometimes keeping something doesn't mean holding on to it. Sometimes it just means acknowledging it existed. He paused, hammer midair. "You sound like someone who's done a lot of thinking." She smiled faintly. "I had time." They finished the fence in silence. Later, as they sat eating a meal she'd made from a successful hunt and gathered roots, he realized something that unsettled him more than any stranger's footsteps ever could. He was no longer counting the days alone, he was counting them together. The mountain man had believed solitude was the only way to survive what he'd lost. But as Lena moved through his world, careful and steady, he began to understand that survival was only part of living. And in the quiet partnership forming between them, built not on need alone, but on choice, he felt something shift inside him, slow and deep, like ice breaking on a river that had been frozen for far too long.